Joining me now from New York City is best-selling author Douglas Murray. Douglas, let's start with the collapse of trust in institutions like the Justice Department and the F.B.I. This is what happens when you allow institutions to be captured by a political party or ideology. NBC released a poll this week showing how trust in the F.B.I. has plummeted amongst Republicans and independents, but it's soared among Democrats. And given the manner in which they have behaved in recent years, the Russian collusion hoax, and now they're targeting conservatives, including most recently a group called Mums for Liberty, you can see why independents and Republicans are now looking at the FBI with suspicion.
Yes, and the tragedy of it, Rita, in modern America, is that it could just as easily flip next month. You know, when the FBI announced that they were going to investigate Hillary Clinton ahead of the 2016 election, the FBI was at rock bottom in trust among Democrats. Now that the indictment seemed to be going the way they'd favor, lo and behold, the FBI's reputation is back up among Democrats. It's so sad to see this. And I think it's not just something we should look on with sort of horror. I think it's a warning to other democracies. I think it's a warning of what happens when your institutions become politicized. You know, I believe that, in Australia and Britain, for instance, we have all sorts of problems. Goodness knows, you and I could list them. But one problem that we haven't got to the extent that America has is this way in which every single branch of government, including the secret state as it used to be known, including the police and much more, just go up and down, or they're one side's 1 month, they're another side's another. You know, it is a real lesson in what not to do if you're an institution, because countries and democracies cannot survive when their institutions are so highly politicized, and at any time they lose the trust of effectively half the population.
Yeah, on that NBC poll, let's just have a look at the results. Back in 1995, it showed that 52% of Republicans, 50% of Democrats and 49% of independents held fairly positive views towards the FBI. So pretty much equal amongst all political groups there. But fast forward to 2022, and you've got Republicans with only 18% trust in the FBI. Democrats 70, they're loving the FBI, and independents have also plummeted to 37%. Douglas, both Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, the Republican frontrunners, have vowed to tackle these institutions that most Republicans believe have been captured by the Democrats and become corrupted. Can you see that happening, and can trust be restored, at least for one half of the population?
It's an incredibly hard task, Rita. I just, my own view is that Donald Trump had 4 years to try to deal with some of these institutions, and they waged such a war on him that, among other things, he was caught up in all the Russian collusion stuff, all of these, just repeated attempts to get him out, but, effectively by some people within the state. That was profoundly anti-democratic, very, very dangerous for the democracy. So, of course, Republicans have their views about it. Donald Trump's supporters would say, well, look, because he had all this stuff thrown in front of him, he didn't have time to reform it. The truth is, I think also he just didn't have a grasp of the detail required. One of the big problems in government is always the sort of politician who thinks that if they say a thing, then it happens. We've all seen that happen. It's not the case. Just because a president says he wants something to happen, you have to work every hour of the day and night to push that policy through. Because as we saw in the Trump years, as we would see again in more Trump years if we had them, you just have to keep on to every detail. And the great leaders of the West in recent decades, including Margaret Thatcher, never let a detail drop. They were on to everyone. You need somebody not just with the bravura and the right ideas, but the discipline.
Absolutely. And that machinery is going to work against you, as it did against Trump, because he went in there promising to drain the swamp, and the swamp were ready for him. Now, you wrote a wonderful piece this week on the inversion of history and the creating of new myths like, I don't know, Black Americans built America and then the rest of the world, if you watch some recent productions. Tell me about this.
Yes, well, it really came because in recent days we learned that there's going to be a new dramatization of Colditz. Colditz was, of course, a castle where some pretty senior military who were captured, prisoners of war, captured by the Nazis, were imprisoned for part of the duration of the war. It's a long-standing, not just celebrated story, but really a story of pride for many British people, because there are all sorts of escape attempts and daring do, but also a lot of just stiff upper lip and getting through things and much, much more. So there have been countless dramatizations of the POWs in Colditz. And then it was announced this weekend by a man who's written another new book about Colditz, that it's going to be revised, his book, and also the television serialization, revised to talk about the racism of the British officers. And yes, you heard that right, geez. Rita. Not the racism of the Nazi officers who were imprisoning the British officers, but the fact that some of the British officers didn't have the views we have in 2023 about race relations or indeed class relations. Douglas Bader, one of probably the most famous Spitfire hero of the Second World War, it's exposed, had some negative views about an Indian man who was there with them. And so this is going to be the thing. In 2023, you do the great drama of Colditz, and you make it where the Brits are the bad guys. And I said, and I gave various other examples of this happening recently. I said, isn't it interesting, Rita, that all of the myths and the stories and the truths that people are proud of in countries like Britain and Australia and America are being ripped away from us? And simultaneously, you turn on Netflix, and it turns out that Cleopatra was basically an African-American woman with a sort of yes, queen sort of attitude towards things. So the British and everyone else, we didn't build anything. We have nothing to be proud of. But it turns out that African-Americans not only built America, but apparently ancient Egypt as well. So old stories are being traduced, and new myths are being built up in our time, and it's very obvious which directions these two things are going in. And
of course, the Black Cleopatra was very nice to her slaves. Slavery was just a picnic back when she was running the show.
She was a nice slave
Now, you wrote in the New York... Nice slave owner, very, very generous with her praise. Now, you... talked about Donald Trump and his attack against Kayleigh McEnany, which took a lot of people by surprise because she served him and his administration admirably. She had one of the toughest jobs as White House press secretary. And you say this shows a lack of loyalty in the man. I'd say it shows a lack of judgment as well. And after all, Kayleigh's crime here was to misquote a poll. It was an honest mistake. And the way he came at her seemed to be really disproportionate.
Yes, I think, you might say that by this stage, everybody knows everything they need to know about the character of Donald J. Trump, his virtues and his flaws. But one of the flaws that just has repeatedly struck me in recent years has been the way in which he has just repeatedly turned on people who've been loyal to him. And I wrote in the New York Post just about the people in his administration, the people who work closest with him, who, whenever they do anything, whether they're in office or out of office, that he even slightly dislikes, he just turns on them and insults him. Kayleigh McEnany was an incredibly well-respected White House spokesperson. She was terrific at taking the incoming fire from the American press, and my gosh, did she give it back at them. She's been incredibly loyal to Trump, but she's her own woman as well. She happened to be on air last week, quoted a poll that she misquoted. Donald Trump immediately takes to social media and uses all of these insulting terms about her and says, that she should be basically fired because she's not a star and only real stars should be on television. It's such a sort of further window, if we needed it, into the sort of incredible pettiness of the man. All the things that are going on in the world at the moment, all of the real enemies that America faces and that Donald Trump faces politically. And what does he do? Once again, he rewards somebody who has been very loyal to him and very good for him with a very ugly, nasty public beating. As I say, it's hard to think that anyone can find out anything new about the character of the man by now. But I thought it was very telling.
And of course, there's been another indictment against Trump today. Do you think that's going to do anything to slow him down as he battles Ron DeSantis for that Republican nomination?
You remember, Rita, that Donald Trump, when he was running, famously said that he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and his supporters would still love him. It's a very accurate statement by the former president. There is a very significant, maybe 30% of the American voting public, or the Republican voters, rather, I should say, who will stick with him, it seems, no matter what. The interesting thing is that even through the legal travails he's had to date, even before the events of the last 24 hours, every time Donald Trump is in legal trouble, his support base either stays the same or actually goes up. Mm-hmm. And I think this is something that people, including the various prosecutors and co, have to be very aware of. If they're carrying out political prosecutions, they should be aware that the Republican base recognizes that to be the case. It goes back to where we started about trust levels in the F.B.I. and other institutions. Republican base don't trust the prosecutors. So it's perfectly possible that yet again, in an attempt to snuff out Donald J. Trump's candidacy, these people are going to put fuel underneath it.
You're 100% right. It's exactly what we started the segment with, and it's this lack of trust in institutions, this belief that these prosecutions are politically motivated. I believe they're politically motivated. You don't have to be a rusted-on Trump supporter to believe that. You just have to look at the record of how these institutions have behaved in recent years. And you're right, they've got all sorts of unintended consequences in play here, and they just don't seem to be waking up to them yet. Now, finally, I've got to ask you about this. The UK, we're hearing more reports of social media outlets colluding with government agencies to suppress free speech. The British government had a secret unit called the Counter Disinformation Unit, very Orwellian sounding there, and it worked with social media companies, Douglas, to censor speech that was critical of lockdowns and mandates and mask restrictions, all that madness. This was happening not just in the US, as we've found out through the Twitter files, but in Australia, in the UK, and I would hazard to guess elsewhere.
Yes, and I think the thing about this story, Rita, is it just chimes in with something that so many of us sort of vaguely intuited at the time. There was something so strange about the way in which, governments around the world all would say the same thing in lockstep. The portions of the media were all expected to say the same thing. And I think that there was just, some of us sort of whiffed at the time, there was something off about this. And now we know one of the reasons why there was something off about it, which is that there was a concerted effort at a government level, colluding with others, including in social media, to basically dampen down voices that were skeptical of government policy. I think it's quite extraordinary. I think there's a lot more to come in this, because remember, the voices that they were dampening down and getting off social media included, scientists from Oxford University, people like Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford. There were sort of serious figures. And I think this is, in a way, the most worrying thing. It's very worrying when any member of the public is effectively sort of muted or silenced by government diktat. But the fact that they could do it with respected figures whose voices we could have done with hearing more, That's something really worrying. And as you say, there is something very Orwellian about this, about government and secretive units deciding not just what the public can say, but what we can hear. I hope that in the endless rolling COVID inquiries to come, there's going to be a real look at exactly what happened at that level and when.
Douglas Murray, thank you for joining me tonight.
Great pleasure as always.